Hello, curious one. Welcome to Renegade Files, your underground connection to paranormal events, unsolved mysteries, and deep cultural analysis. Weirdness is afoot. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, coming to you from the Jungle Villa Outpost, deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files, episode 119, UFOs from the Ocean, Navy Encounters, USOs, and the Unexplained Deep. Unidentified objects in the skies have been seen for as long as humans have been looking up. Because they're flying, and because we believe the technology is advanced beyond ours, we assume they arrived in our airspace from the unknowns of outer space. But what if that assumption is wrong? Because there's another unknown that surrounds us. It's not distant or theoretical. It covers the majority of the planet, and yet we have barely explored it. It's vast, deep, and dark, and in many ways still beyond our reach. It's the ocean. Oceans cover the majority of the Earth's surface, and only a fraction of their terrain has been explored. Beneath the oceans are entire regions of this planet that remain unseen. If something wanted to exist or visit here without being easily observed, the deep ocean would offer an environment that's stable, hidden, and immense beyond everyday comprehension. And modern accounts of unexplained objects moving into and out of water have become so common that these objects have their own name: USOs, Unidentified Submersible Objects. In this episode, we'll look at modern USO encounters, their parallels to ancient folklore sea creatures, underwater base theories, and the implications of an advanced race of intelligent beings living right under our noses. This time, okay, I'm only going to say this once, but can't resist. This episode is a deep dive. Come with me now, and together we will swim into the unknown waters of Renegade Files. Okay, that's quite enough. Come along now, let's explore UFOs from the ocean, Navy Encounters, USOs, and the Unexplained Deep.
USOs and the Unexplained Deep. USOs and the Unexplained Deep. USOs and the Unexplained Deep.
Part 1. The Nimitz Encounter. On November 14, 2004, off the coast of Southern California, the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group was conducting training operations when something unusual started to appear on radar. The USS Princeton, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser operating within the group, had been tracking multiple unknown aerial contacts over several days. These objects were descending from extremely high altitudes, dropping rapidly to very low elevations, then hovering or moving in ways that didn't align with known aircraft performance. The radar operator aboard the Princeton, Chief Petty Officer Kevin Day, monitored these contacts as they appeared consistently on the system. The tracks were stable enough to rule out sensor noise, and the behavior of the objects suggested controlled movement rather than drifting or atmospheric interference. After several days of observation, a decision was made to send fighter jets to intercept one of these unknown contacts. Commander David Fravor, commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41, along with Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, were flying FA-18 Super Hornets during a training mission when they were redirected toward the location of one of these radar tracks. They were given coordinates over open ocean with no known aircraft scheduled to be in the area. As they approached the intercept point, their initial observations were directed to the surface of the water. Fravor described the ocean that day as calm, with no significant wave activity and no whitecaps across the surrounding area. It was stable, uniform, stretching out in all directions, but within a calm expanse, there was a localized disturbance that stood out immediately. Below them, they observed a patch of churning water, as if something just beneath the surface was actively moving. The disturbance was defined and concentrated, not spread out like a natural swell or wave. It appeared as a white frothing area against the otherwise smooth ocean. There was no visible vessel in that location, no submarine below, no surface craft was present to account for the disturbance. Whatever was causing the movement in the water wasn't visible from above, yet the effect on the surface was clear and contained. As they got closer, they saw an object hovering directly above that disturbance. Fravor described the object as a solid white shape, smooth and elongated, with no visible markings, wings, or control surfaces. Its general appearance led to the now well-known nickname Tic Tac. It was moving erratically but not randomly. The object shifted position, adjusted altitude, and appeared to respond to the environment in a way that suggested awareness. As Fravor descended to get a closer look, the object reacted. It started to mirror his movements in a loose, circling pattern, maintaining a distance while adjusting its position with precision. He saw no visible propulsion system, no exhaust trail, no indication of lift mechanisms that would explain its ability to remain stable in the air while performing rapid directional changes. The interaction lasted only a short time, but it was enough to establish a pattern. The object was not drifting, it was not passively suspended, it was actively maneuvering in relation to his aircraft. At one point, as Fravor moved in closer, the object accelerated. It didn't gradually increase speed in a way that would be expected from a conventional aircraft. It simply departed the area at a velocity that removed it from visual range almost instantly. Moments later, radar operators reported that the object had reappeared at a location many miles away, near what they termed a pre-designated training point, suggesting either extremely high speed or some form of predictive positioning. The disturbance beneath the object remained one of the most difficult aspects of the encounter to explain. It wasn't incidental. It wasn't a background condition. It was central to what the pilots observed upon arrival. A defined region of active water movement with no visible source, directly beneath an object that exhibited controlled but incredible flight characteristics. You can explore in detail the Tic Tac UFO and more in Renegade Files episode number 6, Military UFO Footage and the Pentagon UFO Report. Fravor would later describe the scene as though something larger might have been just below the surface, interacting with the object above. He didn't claim to have seen any submerged craft, and there's no confirmed evidence of one, but the implication arises naturally from the observation. Something was affecting the water in a way that suggested motion or displacement beneath it. In the context of this episode, that detail becomes important because it introduces the possibility that the aerial object was not operating independently of the ocean, but in connection with it or in connection with something in it. The encounter provided a set of observations of a controlled object in the air, a localized disturbance in the water, but no visible mechanism linking the two. For years, the focus has remained on the performance of the object in the sky, its speed, maneuverability, and lack of identifiable propulsion. Those elements are significant, but when connected somehow to the water below or something in the water, the context of this conversation expands. If an unknown object is observed hovering directly over a defined disturbance in an otherwise calm ocean, then the question isn't limited to how it moves through the air. The question extends below the surface of the water. What was beneath the water on that day, and was the object above it acting alone? If you enjoy these investigations and want to help keep this independent show alive, join the Renegade Files agency on Patreon and unlock exclusive agent-only bonus episodes, the Dark Intel Files, and secret dispatches. If you believe in digging deeper and keeping the truth alive, then join me at patreon.com/renegadefiles. There's a link in the show notes. And become an RFA agent today. And thank you so much. If you are already an RFA agent on Patreon, you make this show possible. Part 2. The USS Omaha Encounter. On July 15th, 2019, in waters off the coast of California once again, personnel aboard the USS Omaha were monitoring a series of unidentified aerial contacts moving through the night sky around the naval group. These were not isolated detections. Multiple objects had been observed operating in the vicinity of U.S. Navy vessels, tracked both visually and through onboard systems. The encounters were recorded, and portions of that footage would later be confirmed by the Pentagon as authentic Navy material. The conditions were dark, with the oceans below reflecting only minimal ambient light. Against that backdrop, the objects appeared as luminous points moving with control and purpose. These were not drifting lights or distant aircraft following predictable flight paths. The motion suggested maneuverability, including changes in direction and altitude that did not align with conventional aircraft behavior. Once again, among the recorded observations, one object stands out because of what happened next. The object appeared spherical in shape, without visible wings or external structure. It was tracked as it moved over the water, maintaining a steady presence within the field of view. At a certain point, the object began to descend. There was no visible loss of stability as it dropped toward the ocean surface. The motion remained controlled, smooth, and deliberate. As it hit the water, there was no visible explosion of spray, no fragmentation, no debris field. The object appeared to enter the ocean without resistance. It did not behave like a conventional aircraft impacting water at speed. It didn't skip across the surface or break apart. It simply transitioned from the air into the water and was no longer visible. No splash. Descriptions from witnesses tell of the ocean opening up as if a vacuum from below hollowed the surface as the object went into it, and then closed like a film scene played in reverse. In standard physics and engineering terms, that transition presents a problem. Objects designed for flight are not built to withstand the density and pressure of water at speed. The impact forces alone would typically result in immediate structural failure. Conversely, objects made for underwater travel are built with reinforced hulls and propulsion systems suited for movement through dense fluid, and so not suited to operating in the air with aerodynamic efficiency. The separation between air and water is not just a difference in location, it's a boundary defined by entirely different physical constraints. And yet, in this case, that boundary did not appear to matter. This type of behavior falls into a category that has been described by the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, as certain recurring characteristics of UFOs known as the 5 observables. They are: 1. Anti-gravity lift. Anti-gravity lift is a characteristic of a flying object that seems to ascend and maneuver through the air without the observable use of control surface such as wings, flaps, or fins, and without any visible means of propulsion such as rotors, propellers, jet engines, or rockets. Number 2, sudden and instantaneous acceleration. Sudden and instantaneous acceleration describes objects that accelerate or change direction so quickly that no human pilot could survive the G-forces. Radar operators tracking the craft in one of the Nimitz observations reported that one of the UFOs descended at more than 30 times the speed of sound. Radar operators on the USS Princeton that day tracked an object going from a standing position, then traversing a distance of 60 miles in 1 minute. This would be 3,600 miles per hour. For reference, a Boeing FA-18 Super Hornet fighter jet has a maximum speed of about 1,200 miles an hour. So this object went from a standstill to 3 times faster than our fastest fighter jet instantly. Number 3, hypersonic velocities without signatures. Hypersonic is the term used to describe an aircraft traveling 5 times faster than the speed of sound. This is also called Mach 5, where Mach 1 is the speed of sound, 767 miles per hour. So Mach 5 is about 3,800 miles per hour. Number 4, low observability or cloaking. Low observability or cloaking refers to the difficulty of viewing an object either visually or mechanically, so like radar, for example. Low observability has been reported by pilots, radar operators, and other witnesses when viewing unexplained objects in the sky. Low observability does not simply mean obstruction. In other words, a flying object passing behind a cloud and becoming impossible to see doesn't qualify for the low observability characteristic of ATIP's 5 observables. And finally, we come to number 5, transmedium travel. Transmedium travel is the description ATIP gives for an object that can be observed moving easily from one distinct environment to another. For example, if an object moves from outer space into Earth's atmosphere without resistance, heat generation, or change in speed, then this is considered transmedium travel. The USS Omaha incident is significant because it presents a clear example of this. An object moving from the sky into the water with no disruption in speed and no splash. In other words, these ATIP descriptions come from the Substack mini-course, ATIP's 5 Observables of a Genuine UFO Encounter, which you can read for free at renegadesignals.substack.com or through the links in the show notes and on our website. So, transmedium movement is not simply a matter of entering water. It's the manner in which that transition occurs. In known engineering, moving from air into water at speed creates resistance, drag, and impact. These are measurable and destructive. The reports associated with these objects describe something different. They describe motion that appears unaffected by these forces. From the perspective of the observer, the object doesn't collide with the surface, it just passes through it. This is where the implications begin to extend beyond a single event. Because if an object can move between air and water without disruption, then it's not limited to one operational environment. It suggests that whatever system is enabling that movement is not interacting with the surrounding medium in a conventional way. In the case of the USS Omaha, the object's descent into the ocean wasn't followed by a recovery operation or a confirmed identification. There was no debris, no wreckage, and no indication of any kind of failure. The object just disappeared beneath the surface of the ocean. For those observing the event, that disappearance marked the end of the visual encounter, but in the context of this investigation, it marks a beginning. Because once objects are seen entering the ocean in this manner, we must ask if these events represent glimpses of a broader pattern. Part 3. The Aguadilla Anomaly Incident. On April 26, 2013, an infrared camera mounted on a U.S. Customs and Border Protection aircraft recorded a sequence of footage near Rafael Hernandez Airport in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. The aircraft had been conducting a routine patrol when the crew detected an unidentified object moving through controlled airspace. The object didn't match any scheduled flight activity, and its behavior prompted further observation. The aircraft infrared tools record heat signatures rather than visible light. This allows for detection of objects that may not be easily seen with the naked eye, especially at night or in low visibility conditions. What the system recorded has since become one of the more widely analyzed pieces of UFO footage. The object appears as a bright thermal signature moving at a steady pace at low altitude, initially over land and then continuing out over water. The motion is consistent and directed, not drifting or erratic. There is no visible wings, no identifiable fuselage, and no obvious propulsion system visible in the infrared spectrum. At a certain point in the recording, the object appears to divide. The single thermal signature separates into two distinct points, each continuing forward. This moment has been interpreted in different ways. Some analysts have suggested that the object physically split into two independent objects. Others have proposed that the effect might be related to the imaging system itself, such as changes in angle, distance, or overlapping heat signatures that move apart. Following this separation, the objects descend toward the ocean surface, and some interpret the objects as going into the ocean. This has contributed to the Aguadilla incident being cited as an example of a possible USO. But this case also serves as an important reminder of the need for caution in interpretation. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or RO, conducted an assessment of the Aguadilla footage and concluded that the object did not demonstrate anomalous capabilities when examined within the context of the available data. They believed that the object was likely a cluster of airborne items, such as sky lanterns, moving with the wind. You've probably seen videos of these things. They're basically like a paper hot air balloon that people make for fun. A kind of flaming litter, but they are pretty in the sky. The apparent speed and behavior of the object could be explained by perspective and sensor characteristics, this according to RO. The division into two objects could have been separate items moving in close proximity and then drifting apart. The appearance of them entering the water could be a visual effect caused by distance, angle, and the limitations of infrared imaging, or they could have just lost elevation and fallen into the water. This doesn't resolve the case, but the footage remains compelling, and the initial interpretation of the event continues to be discussed, but the presence of a detailed counter-analysis like this highlights an important point for this episode. Not every case that appears unusual is necessarily evidence of unknown technology or intelligence. Some cases can be explained through a combination of environmental factors, sensor limitations, and basic misinterpretation. The Aguadilla incident stands out because it sits directly at that intersection. It has visual evidence that's been widely circulated. It's open to more than one explanation. It demonstrates how quickly a sequence of images can lead to a strong conclusion, and how those conclusions can shift when additional information becomes available. In the context of unidentified objects associated with water, this case plays a specific role because it shows how the appearance of transmedia movement can emerge from footage, and how that appearance might be examined carefully, once again accepted as fact, and then ideas about it changed. As we move through these cases, some will remain unsolved and some will lean toward conventional explanation. The challenge is not to force a single answer, but to evaluate each of them on their own terms. Which leads us to Part 4, the Shag Harbor Incident. So this goes a little bit back on the night of October 4th, 1967, along the southern coast of Nova Scotia, Canada. So this is like Trailer Park Boys territory. A series of observations began that would lead to one of the most well-documented ocean-related UFO incidents on record. The location was near the small fishing community of Shag Harbor, an area familiar with maritime traffic, also aircraft routes, and normal patterns of activity along a coastline. At about 11:20 p.m., multiple witnesses reported seeing a large object moving through the sky. Among the witnesses was intoxicated local James Leahy. No, I'm just kidding. It was Lori Wickens, who was driving with several of her friends when they spotted a row of lights in the sky. It seemed to be multiple lights on a single object, and it was traveling low toward the water. The lights were described as glowing with a yellow or amber tone. They were arranged in a pattern that didn't match conventional aircraft navigation lights. The witnesses watched the object descend at an angle toward the ocean. Its motion suggested a controlled approach rather than a fall. It moved steadily. It then disappeared below the horizon line where the water met the night sky. Moments later, they saw a bright flash at the surface and the water churning. They thought a plane had crashed. They contacted local authorities, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police responded to the reports. Officers arrived at the scene and began taking statements from witnesses who had observed the object's descent. The Mounties relayed the information through their official channels, and a coordinated search and rescue operation was actually initiated. Canadian military units and their Coast Guard vessels were dispatched to the location. Search teams moved into the harbor and the surrounding waters during the night, and reports from fishermen on the water described seeing a patch of foam on the surface, marking the approximate area where the object had entered. No debris or evidence of aircraft wreckage was ever found. The search continued into the following days, when divers deployed to examine the seafloor in the area found nothing as well. Further checks were conducted with aviation authorities to determine whether any aircraft had been reported missing or unaccounted for in the region at that time, but no such reports were ever found. This left investigators with a sequence of events that included multiple independent witnesses, a visible descent of something into the ocean, an official response involving law enforcement and military units, and a search operation that included divers and produced no conventional explanation. If you want to dive even deeper into the world of Renegade Files, join the Renegade Files agency on Patreon and become an RFA agent today. For less than you tip a pizza guy, you can help me keep doing the show, and you get a bunch of bonus episodes, cool stuff, and I'll see you in there. Thank you. Part 5. Bill Cooper's Submarine USO Encounter. William Cooper was a former U.S. Navy intelligence briefing team member who served in the Navy during the Vietnam era. He later became widely known for his claims regarding the nefarious agendas of the New World Order, but also about classified information and UFOs. He had a radio show called The Hour of the Time and was the author of the verbose OG conspiracy theory tome, Behold a Pale Horse, which UFO investigator Stanton Friedman once called Behold a Pail of Horseshit. Among Bill Cooper's claims was a personal account of witnessing an object emerging from the ocean while he was stationed aboard a submarine. According to Cooper, the event occurred while he was on duty on the bridge of a surfaced submarine. The exact date and location of the encounter have not been publicly confirmed, but the setting is described as open ocean with standard visibility conditions. From that position, Cooper states that he observed a large, luminous, saucer-shaped object rising up from beneath the surface of the water. He reported that the object emerged vertically, moved upward from the ocean without any visible sign of resistance or disturbance that would normally accompany a large body breaking through the surface. There was no explosive displacement of water, No debris and no fragmentation. The motion was smooth and continuous. As the object cleared the surface, it continued ascending into the air. Cooper described it as bright and clearly visible against the sky, maintaining its structure and trajectory as it moved upward. There were no visible wings, no exhaust, and no identifiable propulsion system. The object didn't appear to struggle against gravity or drag as it transitioned from water into air. He said that in minutes the object returned and entered back into the water. Again, no splash or turbulence, but that the ocean just opened up before the object and let it in. Others joined him on the surfaced bridge of the submarine, and the group watched this object keep pace with the moving submarine and exit, then enter the ocean multiple times. Cooper said one officer took many photos as this happened. When the object lifted into the sky and vanished for good, a commanding officer on the bridge told all the men, "That never happened, and you will never speak of it," or words to that effect. Of course, Bill Cooper did talk about this event and many others before he eventually met his demise in 2001 at his Arizona home during a confrontation with sheriff's deputies while they attempted to arrest him on charges of aggravated assault and tax evasion, and that is the short version of that story. The Cooper observation from the vantage point of a submarine bridge, while with others, is interesting because personnel in that environment are trained to monitor ocean conditions and objects with attention to detail. The bridge position provides a clear line of sight for navigation. An object emerging from the water in that setting would be observed by trained sailors. This account is often referenced as an early example of transmedium travel. It also exists only as Bill Cooper's testimony, but he did stick to his story for years. He eventually came to believe that all of the UFO information he saw while in the military, including his famous USO sighting, was a form of controlled revelation or disinformation orchestrated for him to either see or learn about for some deeper agenda within which he was a pawn. Part 6. Coastal sightings and the scale of the ocean. Many of the more recent sightings involving unidentified objects and the ocean happen not just out at sea, but along coastlines, particularly in areas where civilian activity, commercial shipping, and military operations all intersect. Both California and Florida rank high in USO or coastline UFO events, and both states also have heavy military and civilian sea traffic. Data collected from modern reporting platforms like the Enigma app adds another layer. The Enigma app collects civilian sightings of unidentified objects. It contains thousands of reports on coastlines and major waterways. A portion of those reports specifically reference USOs. This is not an endorsement, just a sort of description of the app. Among these accounts are objects entering the water without visible impact, without visible effects, and in some cases, objects rising into the air from the sea. Another element that appears is proximity to known military operating areas, naval training zones, restricted airspace, and offshore military exercises often overlap with the locations where USO sightings are reported. This isn't proof of cause, but it is seemingly related. So the oceans cover about 70% of the Earth's surface. Much of that is deep ocean with depths that can't be easily accessed or explored, if at all. Only a portion of the seafloor has been charted in high resolution. When it comes to direct visual observation, the percentage is extremely small. So the ocean floor is, in many ways, uncharted territory, and it is vast. As we know, it's the majority of the Earth. But for example, you could fit 137,000 New York cities on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. 137,000 New York cities, and that's just the Atlantic. So what we're really talking about here are multiple sightings of USOs, crafts that exhibit remarkable capabilities of speed, motion, and transmedium travel. And not only is the environment from which they come and back into which they vanish mostly unexplored, it covers the majority of our planet. Part 7. Theory shift and underwater-based concepts. So the natural conclusion has always been that UFOs originate from somewhere beyond the Earth. That's still the dominant theory, but sightings of unidentified objects near coastlines or traveling between the air and the ocean all contribute to the idea that some of these crafts might either originate in the deep oceans or at least use that medium as a hidden base. This is where we get the speculative terms ultra-terrestrial and crypto-terrestrial, or at least they relate here. Ultra-terrestrials are intelligent beings that exist on Earth but are not part of our ordinary human classification. So creatures who may have come from another planet but that now reside here. So like the Nordic aliens. We also have the concept of crypto-terrestrial, which suggests the possibility of an advanced form of life that actually originated here on Earth, but remains hidden from the general awareness. Maybe the reptilians could be considered crypto-terrestrials. So again, these are speculative terms, but they provide a structure for considering reports that don't easily fit the old extraterrestrial hypothesis for UFO origins. The ocean becomes relevant in this context because of its characteristics as a long-term environment. It's stable over geological timescales. It provides extensive concealment, and it contains regions that are rarely observed directly. These factors make it plausible that it could be a setting for activity that would require both space and limited visibility. From this perspective, the ocean is not simply a location where objects are occasionally seen. It becomes part of a broader system that could support ongoing presence. The repeated association between sightings and water starts to take on added significance. There are also recurring claims related to structures beneath the ocean's surface. These claims often describe submerged locations where objects are said to enter and exit the water repeatedly. The descriptions vary, but they tend to focus on deep regions, offshore areas, and locations that are already known to be difficult to access. Not always, but most of the time. In some accounts, these locations are associated with deep ocean trenches, where depth and pressure create conditions that limit exploration. In others, they're linked to areas near islands or coastlines where unusual activity has been reported over extended periods of time. Think about, like, the Bermuda Triangle. Recall the whole marginalized discoveries of what people say might be Atlantis under the Caribbean near Cuba. Enormous pyramid structures rendered and plotted on deep water radar, and then very quickly made off limits to researchers. This becomes what dark journalist Daniel List calls the hot zone. You can go hard into all that craziness in Renegade Files episode 69, Finding Atlantis, Plato, Hemingway, and Epstein's Satanism. It's all tied together. Get it? Tied. Okay. So what happens here is that when we have situations where discoveries are quickly covered up and areas are restricted, then researcher logic kicks in and we start to think that more is going on underwater in these spots than just some old structure found that might have been built there when that was land. The idea of active underwater ultra-terrestrial or crypto-terrestrial bases appears in these discussions as a way to account for repeated movements between air and water. If objects are observed entering and exiting the ocean in a consistent manner and in a consistent place, then it makes sense that there might be a point of origin or destination beneath the surface. This line of thought also connects with older narratives that describe hidden regions beyond ordinary access. Folklore of antiquity often spoke of lost underwater cities and kings who ruled the depths. The ocean could provide global cover for such legends. Part 8. Ancient Sea Traditions and Modern Parallels. Long before radar systems, infrared cameras, or naval tracking data, there were accounts of the ocean that described more than weather, currents, and navigational hazards. These accounts came from early civilizations, maritime cultures, and coastal communities that depended on the sea for survival. Across these cultures, there's a recurring theme of intelligent life under the ocean. One of the earliest recorded examples comes from ancient Mesopotamia. In that tradition, there's a figure known as Oannes, described as an amphibious being that emerged from the sea to interact with human society. The accounts describe this figure as possessing knowledge and the ability to communicate. Oannes is credited with teaching humans writing, law, and organized living. Many maritime cultures also tell stories of mermaids who combine human and aquatic characteristics. Merfolk live in the oceans, are observed at or near the surface, and are often described as having awareness, intention, and in some cases, in-depth interactions with humans. A relative of the merfolk is the siren. Sirens are said to sing beautiful songs to lure sailors to crash on the rocks, where the sirens would then entice the men overboard and drag them down to the depths. There are also traditions that describe larger and more imposing creatures. The ages of wind-powered sailing explorations brought back stories of massive sea creatures, giant serpents living in the deep ocean. The Kraken, associated with northern waters, is described as a large entity capable of destroying ships at will. Other traditions reference a powerful and malicious monster called the Leviathan, which was said to control certain shipping lanes and even hold grudges against specific captains who evaded it. The seashores and the worlds below the ocean surfaces have been settings for folklore and legends about creatures in the oceans for ages. Different regions and time periods have given us repeated references to intelligent beings who live in the ocean, who emerge from it, who interact briefly with humans and then vanish again below the surface. Modern stories of USOs seem to parallel many of the old legendary tales. Ancient mariners interpreted them as monsters, and modern eyes apply technological filters. The transition from describing beings to describing objects reflects a broader change in how experiences are described. Earlier accounts used the vocabulary available at the time, often shaped by mythology, religion, and oral tradition. Modern accounts rely on technical language, sensor data, and visual recordings. The underlying experience of observing something associated with the ocean remains a common factor. Think about the ancient aliens concept of a Dark Ages priest seeing an angel in the heavens, while a modern European hiker sees an extraterrestrial craft in the same sky. These are cases in modern reporting where luminous objects are seen at the surface of the water, but they move with control and then descend below it. There are also accounts of objects rising from the ocean and continuing into the air. These descriptions focus on movement and behavior, often without clear identification of what the object is or how it operates. The connection between these modern observations and earlier traditions simply highlights a continuity of experience. The setting is the same. The point of interaction remains near the surface of the water. The event involves something appearing, being observed for a limited time, and then disappearing. As these elements are considered together, the focus returns to the pattern itself. Reports separated by geography and time share structural similarities in how the events unfold. The ocean is the setting. The appearances occur at or near the surface, the observation is brief, and the departure leaves us with more questions than answers. My summary. Oceans cover the majority of the planet. They are amazingly deep and filled with a diversity of life that boggles the mind. Oceans are a vast domain of depth, mystery, and minuscule exploration. If unidentified objects are being observed in proximity to that environment, then the characteristics of the ocean become part of the story. The scale alone introduces a level of uncertainty. The limited access to enormous portions of that environment means that not all activity within it is readily visible. Advanced and intelligent activity could exist within the oceans without ever being detected from the surface. Reports from commercial pilots, naval aviators and sailors, and other military units have described unidentified submersible objects that enter the air from the ocean, perform attitudes and performances of flight that defy our understanding of physics, then return into the ocean to leave nothing but mysteries behind. Some of these modern observations parallel a long history of human stories from the ocean. Accounts of beings associated with the sea, emerging from it and returning to it, appear in multiple regions and traditions. These descriptions reflect attempts to understand experiences that don't fit within our ordinary explanations. As the context changes, the descriptions change with it. In more recent accounts, the focus shifts toward the objects, their motion, and observable characteristics. The underlying experience, though, remains centered on the interaction between something unidentified and the ocean environment. One fascinating idea comes from researcher and author Jim Marrs, one of my favorites. He addressed the role of planetary oceans in the context of unidentified aerial phenomena in his book Alien Agenda. Marrs suggested that the oceans could serve as a form of cover for advanced crafts or visiting intelligences. His reasoning focused on the physical properties of liquid water. Marrs noted that liquid water must maintain consistent properties of temperature and density under comparable conditions. In other words, for a planet to have liquid water on its surface, certain physical aspects must be in place. Too cold and it's frozen. Too hot and it's water vapor. A liquid ocean would always be within a certain range of temperature and density and pressure regardless of the planet it was on. From that viewpoint, an ocean could provide a stable and familiar and predictable medium for operation, especially for a system designed to function across different planetary environments. So, the ocean, in this theory, becomes a logical place for a visiting intelligence to occupy while they're here. The ocean remains a space that's only partially understood, where direct observation is severely limited and where activity is more difficult to track than on land or even in the open sky. Every year, hundreds or even thousands of unidentified submersible objects are seen either from land, from aircraft, or from ships at sea. Speculation abounds, and the answers remain submerged. Thank you sincerely for investigating USOs with me. Subscribe or follow the show now so together we can meet here next time and explore the deepest covert stories of hauntings, aliens, UFOs, cryptids, conspiracy theories, and unsolved mysteries. I am so glad to have you in the Renegade Files crew. You have listened to this episode so far. You have heard all about the USOs. Right now, most people will tap the Patreon link in the show notes. Do it, and come check out everything I've made just for you there, and I'll see you inside. Until our next adventure, I'm your host, Lex Gordon. Stay wild, D&D child.